Hi, I'm Ed Levy. I'm a lifelong lover of Shakespeare, and I write book and lyrics for musical theater. And I'm very excited to hear Dennis Bro's lecture on Shakesperean Noir.
Okay, thank you, Ed. So, this lecture, which I gave yesterday to a group of Indian academics who forgot to push the record button, and hence you all are treated to it. It's called Shakespearean Noir. Wells, Falstaff, and Macbeth, Kurosawa's The Bad Sleep Well, and Albert Maltz's The Journey of Simon McKeever. Well, who am I? I'm Dennis Bro, professor, journalist, and novelist. I taught television studies at the Sorbonne and literary studies at Paris 10. I was a tenured professor in New York. My field of study is film and television. I'm also a novelist, having written two books about film, one about art, and three about television. And in the last few years, five novels about Los Angeles in the 1940s and 50s. And that's where I am right now. I'm also a journalist. I'm a television critic with a column titled Decoding Network TV for the British Daily Morning Star, Paris correspondent for Arts Express on a national US radio network, Pacifica. I also write for the websites LA Progressive here in Los Angeles, and which is where I'm working, as I said, on this sixth book in the series of detective thrillers, the most current of which is The Dark Ages. So that's my book, The Dark Ages. That's the current book. All right. So first is to define noir, since we're talking about Shakespearean noir. It is a dark impulse with doomed characters who nevertheless struggle finally to do what is right in a world gone wrong. That's a bit of a poetic description, but there's an even more poetic one by Raymond Chandler. His famous statement is, "Down these mean streets walks a man who is not himself mean, and woman." Um, so think of films like Chinatown, or in India, where I gave the talk yesterday. There's Chandler's The Simple Art of Murder, Santush. By the way, I should also mention, if you can't get enough of noir, I'm teaching a course called Darkest LA, Greed and Corporate Graft in La La Land, and that begins May 2nd. So you have a chance for that too. Okay, to start now, when we say Shakespearean noir, we don't mean that there are traces of the noir impulse in Shakespeare. What we mean instead is that Shakespeare and the tragedies founded noir. One of the crucial sources for this style, of course, another one might be the Bible, with Cain killing Abel, and that's sort of a noir staple with one friend betraying another or one diverging from another and coming up against him that we see in lots of stuff. But back to Shakespeare. It's in the tragedies that this dark impulse occurs. And for me, those are the greatest of the plays, though, of course, some like the histories and the comedies, which themselves have inspired subgenres of both comedy, think of the screwball comedy or the Shakespearean farce, and the histories, what we now call the biopic. Okay, one of the great interpreters of the Bard of Avon is Orson Welles. Welles, eventually the director of Citizen Kane, began in the theater in the 30s and loved Shakespeare and loved to play in and direct his plays. His Julius Caesar, uh, in modern dress in 1937, evoked Hitler and Mussolini. His Shylock, in The Merchant of Venice, is one of the great speeches against anti-Semitism by laying out the cliches that surrounded the character of the Jewish moneylender and humanizing that historically ugly stereotype. But I want to focus on two other moments. The first is Wells' Falstaff in his film Chimes at Midnight. The film is a condensation of three history plays, Henry IV, parts one and two, and Henry V. But the story is focalized through the bawdy, rowdy character sorry, of John Falstaff, who Wells makes the tragic hero. With Wells describing the story itself as its core a betrayal of friendship. Hal, the prince, has two fathers. One is his actual father, the king, and his calling to be the next king. That is all about duty. And the other is the opposite, Sir John Falstaff, who, with his debauchery, there's Wells Falstaff, um, and all kinds of excess, introduces Hal to the wanton life. Hal spends his time with Falstaff at the Boar's Head Tavern. In war, when Falstaff goes to war, he hides in the bushes. But when Hal takes the kingly mantle, he deserts his old friend and drinking companion. It is seen in Wells' version as an utter betrayal. And he says the famous lines, which we're going to also see Wells say, I know thee not, old man, fall to thy prayers, how ill white hairs become a fool and jester. I have long dreamed of such a kind of man, so surfeit swelled, so old and so profane. But being awaked, I do despise my dream. And that is Hal turning on his friend and betraying him. So I'm going to play now a clip, or the clip, the last clip from Falstaff, because from Chimes at Midnight, because Falstaff has realized Hal's going to be the king, and he thinks, wow, this is really going to open things up for me. I'm going to get a nice retirement out of this. And so he goes to talk to him, and this is the clip that we're going to look at. What did you say?
I speak to thee, my heart. I know thee not, old man. Fall to thy prayers. How ill white hairs become a fool and jester. I have long dreamed of such a kind of man, so surfeit swelled, so old, and so profane. But being awaked, I do despise my dream. Make less thy body hence, and more thy grace. Leave gormandizing. Know the grave doth gape for thee thrice wider than for other men. Lie not to me with a fool-born jest. Presume not that I am the thing I was. For God doth know, so shall the world perceive, that I have turned away my former self. So will I those that kept me company. When thou dost hear I am as I have been, approach me, and thou shalt be as thou wast, the tutor and the feeder of my riots. Till then, I banish thee on pain of death, as I have done the rest of my misleaders, not to come near our person by 10 miles. Life, I will allow you, but lack of means enforce you not to evil. And as we hear you do reform yourselves, we will, according to your strength and qualities, give you advancement. At your charge, my lord, to see perform the tenor of our word.
And Ed really reads Shakespeare a lot, so he may want to chime in here. But just to say, it's sort of amazing when literally Hal really does turn his back on him. And the thing I love the most in this is that after he's said, well, we're kindly not going to kill you. We're just going to banish you from everything that you know when you came here thinking that you were going to, maybe get a retirement or whatever. And Falstaff looks at him like, "Are you kidding me? Can this really be the same?" And then of course the whole denial of this whole life was just a dream. It's as Louis Althazar called it, interpolation. This calling into power, in a sense, destroys, in terms of Wells's view, in terms of Falstaff's view, destroys Hal. It doesn't make him a great king. Go ahead, Ed.
This so captures the cruelty and sadness of this moment and makes this history play almost a tragedy.
Yes.
And Shakespeare always had so many layers to his work. And so it does have the layer of Hal is assuming the mantle of who he was supposed to be. But this points up the other side of it, the cruelty and the sadness of it.
Yes. It kind of savage indictment of power and how to assume absolute power is almost to be inhuman. And you're totally right. You know what Wells does is he takes the history plays and he turns them by combining the three of them into tragedy, as viewed from Falstaff's perspective instead of simply as history play. Uh, okay, that was great comment. So now we're going to look at Wells' Macbeth. This is done for Republic Studios, a studio that did B Westerns and home of the B Western Republic. And there's much galloping around on those well-worn horse paths, but this is also at the time of the blacklist, of beginning of McCarthyism, the Red Scare, and Wells adds a layer to Macbeth, making him not just a creature of blind, naked ambition, but the epitome of this corrupting power, the killer of all around him, infecting the Scottish kingdom with a venom of ambition, which knows no bounds, and then discovers he has sealed his own doom. Wells does this film just before he has to leave the country in 1948. As he was hounded out by the IRS for, he claimed, his political beliefs, which were very left and very much of the popular front at the time, which was sort of, there was a sort of corporate offensive to rid the country of these kinds of beliefs, and they rid the country of Orson Welles. And Macbeth's path ironically matches that of Senator McCarthy himself, at one point commanding absolute power and terrifying the populace like Macbeth, and then falling from those heights in what was called the Army McCarthy hearings, where a lawyer, Joseph Welsh, confronted McCarthy about his underhanded tactics, saying, "Have you no decency, sir?" And overnight, McCarthy's power faded, and he slunk back to Minnesota, where after a while he died of drinking. So there is a little bit of a Macbeth there. Okay. And Wells talks about how the best flee the kingdom, Malcolm and Macduff, as Wells himself was about to be forced to flee this darkness which was consuming the US. Now, we're going to watch a clip, the Banquo scene here, and this visually is the noir period in Hollywood in 1948. Macbeth, played by Wells, has just ordered Banquo, his best friend, murdered because he fears him as a rival. And we see him talking to the killers, and then in the same shot, a long take, so we don't cut, he moves from the killers into the banquet, where he's haunted by his guilt, as the film noir hero frequently questions his own actions. Okay, let's see if I can play this. And here we go. Oops, what was that?
Stop using ChatGPT like
sorry.
everyone else. Do this instead. To the men over 50 who don't know how to use.
Sorry. Okay, let's play Macbeth instead.
Lord, I will not. I will not. I will not feel your feast.
Okay, so he's just come from the two killers of Banquo telling him Banquo is dead. Now he goes without cutting. We don't cut. And the camera just follows him as he enters the banquet feast. And you see how dark it is. This is really the noir style, and this is 1948. It is the epitome and moment of the noir style, which mixes very well with Macbeth.
You know your own degrees.
Sit down. And first and last, a hearty welcome. Here, had we now our country's honor roofed, where the grace person of our Banquo present. His absence, sir, lays blame upon his promise.
My royal lord, you do not give the cheer.
Sweet remembrance, sir. I drink to our good friend Banquo, whom we miss. Would he were done this. What is the moves, your highness? Oh, canst not say I did. Never shake thy glory, oxen. Gentlemen, rise. His highness is not well.
Sit, worthy friends. My lord is often thus, and hath been from his youth.
Look. Lo. What say you?
Of this good peers, but as a thing of custom, 'tis no other. Only it spoils the pleasure of the time. Shame itself. Makes such faces. And all's done you look but on a stool.
Avaunt! And with my sight, let the earth hide thee. Thy bones are marrowless. Thy blood is cold. Thou hast no speculation in those eyes which thou dost glare with.
The fit is momentary. Upon a thought, he will again be well.
What man dare? I dare. Approach thou like the rugged Russian bear, the armed rhinoceros, or the Hyrcan tiger. Take any shape but that, and my firm nerves shall never tremble, or be alive again, and bear me to the desert with thy sword. If trembling I inhabit, then protest me the baby of a girl. Hence!
Painting of your fear.
Okay. And indeed, it is the very painting of his fear. The first time we don't see him, but Macbeth does. The second time we do see Banquo as his guilt overwhelms him and all is dark at the banquet. It's not bloody Banquo, but as Lady Macbeth says, the very painting of your fear. That is, this is a projection of his guilt. Banquo is an otherworldly ghost, and here we have Wells acknowledging the noir aspect in Shakespeare at a B studio, because the major A studios no longer wanted him. And it was often at B studios or secondary B films that the noir form was created and flourished. And here we have it flourishing. And I just want to call your attention to the extended finger. This is a beautiful technique that Wells uses, in the darkness. Yes, go ahead, Ed. You're muted.
This is a beautiful realization of power and ambition driving somebody mad. And Lady Macbeth trying to rein it in so he can maintain power over the other lords who are there. And but she's not really quite doing it, it doesn't feel like.
No, she can't cover, see CYA, she can't cover his ass, you know, because he keeps erupting. Because the guilt is so palpable that even she can't hide it. Okay, so we'll go back now. Okay, and now we're going to go to Kurosawa. Next, we go to the Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, who remade and reworked many of Shakespeare's tragedies. Throne of Blood was, which I'll bring up, there's a Throne of Blood, that's Toshiro Mifune, his great actor. Throne of Blood was Macbeth in the Japanese samurai period, and Ron, his version of Lear, set in 16th century Japan when Shakespeare would have been writing. Both of those are more literal adaptations, but the one I think is one of the greatest that we're going to talk about has one of the greatest titles I think of all time. The title is The Bad Sleep Well, and this is Kurosawa's one of Kurosawa's noirs, which was a genre that he was familiar with. What makes this so interesting is that it's a modern adaptation set in its contemporary period of Japan, 1960, at a moment when the Japanese economic miracle is starting to bloom and Japan is reemerging on the global stage as a major economic power, having recovered from the defeat of World War II and the subsequent American occupation. What also marks it apart in Shakespeare adaptations is that it's not a straightforward redo, but rather Kurosawa picks and chooses what parts he will use and where he will distribute them. We do not know at the opening even who the Hamlet character is, much less what he wants. This is his version of Hamlet. We do sense, though, in the reporter's querying of the family at this corporate marriage that something is rotten in Denmark, or rather contemporary Japan. One of the crucial scenes in Hamlet is, of course, the player's scene, where the always scheming Hamlet writes a play about the killing of a king to catch out Claudius in his murdering of Hamlet's father, old Hamlet. Shakespeare puts the scene in the middle of this play, and it clinches Hamlet's suspicion that Claudius, the usurper, who has married Hamlet's mother Gertrude, has killed his father. Kurosawa puts the scene at the beginning and at a wedding party where the corporate vice president is marrying his daughter off to his secretary Nishi, who is played by Kurosawa's grand actor Toshiro Mifune. As Hamlet proclaims, the play's the thing in which will catch the conscience of the king. The wedding party is interrupted prior to this by police coming into arrest one of the members of the corporation for embezzlement, but it then goes forward in this scene, and that's what we'll look at here now. Let's see. Okay. Oops. Let's see. I've got to minimize this. Okay. Oops. I'm going to move this. Okay. Here's The Bad Sleep Well.
では、ここで新郎新婦の手によってウェディングケーキにナイフを入れていただきます。ウェディングケーキはまた来たね。終わってるな、あのケーキ。業者からの贈り物だろう。あれさっき話に出た問題の新築庁舎。見ろ、あのバランスしてある窓。7階。病理自殺のあったあの窓。
Okay, so you don't know this, and nobody does really in the film yet. This is really just the opening scene of this corporate marriage. But as the reporters say, the rose in the top window is one of the members of the corporation who jumped out of the window, who we later learn is Nishi's father. Nishi is impersonate someone here. He's the one who's getting married. That's Nishi with the glasses. And the two people who freak out are the two people who helped arrange this forced suicide in which Nishi or Hamlet is going to be, revenging. That's the whole rest of the film. But we don't know any of this. We're just, it's one of the things about this opening scene that's so strange is it's mostly shot from the reporter's point of view, and we're watching it at a distance, which gives this impression that Japanese corporate power is something that's really concealed and hidden. We can only watch it from a distance. We can't actually, get behind or see what the real machinations are, and that's what the film is eventually going to reveal. But it's one of the geniuses of this thing. Plus, the putting the plays the scene, the plays the thing scene in the opening of the film is really quite daring. Ed, did you want to comment on any previous Hamlets in this or anything?
Yeah, it's really interesting that since it comes first, it's a little obscured as opposed to the play as it happens in Hamlet, where it's really a reenactment of Claudius killing the father of Hamlet. And where it is, what happens at the beginning of Hamlet is the ghost coming out. And so this is a really interesting image and sort of objective correlative of the ghost coming out. It's making it into a very strong image. It's really striking. I can't wait to see this movie. I haven't seen it.
Yes. And the wedding cake, the wedding cake, this kind of symbol of the corporate marriage, but then and it's a rose that's sticking out the window, a black rose signifying this death. Now Nishi's bride has I'm sorry, we don't know yet it's Nishi, as I said, the secretary only posing, and is actually the son of the assistant chief who jumped from the window the rose is sticking out of. And with his death, a bribery investigation was halted in the corporation. But strangely, we only know about this from the press, and we don't yet know that Nishi or Hamlet has staged this scene and observed the reaction of the corporate officer Wada. That's Wada. It's all concealed, as is much of the story, and adds an element of showing up how obscure Japanese power structure is and how difficult it is to expose. Nishi's bride has a club foot that is a physical ailment like Ophelia's mental contortions. Later, we have one of the strangest scenes, and I'm going to show this now, in Kurosawa's cinema or in anyone's, that adds to this idea that action occurs off camera and is difficult to know when you're talking about the machinations of corporate power. The corporate head, who is actually a vice president, is truly evil and even drugs his daughter to keep her from aiding her husband, Nishi. But Iwabuchi, the corporate VP, sabotages everything and has, okay, and well, it has Nishi, the Hamlet figure, taken care of. And so I want to play this scene now. So let's see, let me get it here. So this is, okay. Okay, so this is, now here we go. This is Ophelia, essentially, and her brother. And they're going to try to save Nietzsche because her father has drugged her.
みんなわかる。
お父さんを信じてる。
俺はな、
She has a clubfoot. In the last scene, Nishi has told her that he truly loves her, and there was a question of whether he loved her or if he was just trying to use her to get revenge on his father. Now, this is Nishi's real best friend. Who actually, this is Nishi. Nishi assumed his identity in order to get close to the corporate head.
あなたですね。西がここにいることを話したのは。おめでとう。おかげで西は殺されましたよ。
So we didn't know any of this. Now we're just finding out.
騙されただけ。これでまた日本中が騙されるんだ。これ来る途中で見たの。貨物列車にぶつけられて、スクラップのように潰された自動車を。西があん中にいたんだ。俺の言うことが信じられない。じゃあ見せてや。西がどんな目に遭わされたか。見ろ。この後見るんだ。のアルコールの瓶と、この注射器の破片を。で、薬用アルコールを静脈に注射されたんだ。俺がもしもの場合にと置いていった自動車に、新品状態のまま持ち込められて、貨物列車にぶつけられたんだ。酔っ払い運転。西の正義感。獅子の努力。この怪事なお面を着せて、
Okay. So what makes this so strange is that Hamlet is killed off screen. Not on screen. And when they're driving by, when his wife and her brother are driving by, we see that car on the side of the road, that car dumped on the side of the road. That's Nishi. That's the car that Nishi was killed in, but we don't know it at the time. These are the Kurosawa saying, I think, the dark, dank regions of Japanese corporate power, and where it exerts itself. To me, the car wreck is the kind of Kurosawa's critique of the wreck of corporate Japan, which finally what happens is, I'm sorry, it's all off screen. We don't know the car is the body of Nishi. So Nishi does not get his revenge, and there's no Fortinbras who shows up to save the kingdom. Instead, Itakura, that's the vice president who has destroyed and shattered his daughter and his son, gets a call from the headman who tells him he cannot quit. He must serve not imperial, but now corporate Japan. Kurosawa chooses to let Claudius win, but in winning, he loses everything. This whole experience in off-screen space where we don't see the death, has also an echo of Shakespeare, where sometimes the blood is kept off stage. And here it's about the way Japanese post-war power conceals the trappings and the illegality on which it stands. And so it's a very different, it's a different phrasing of Hamlet, but certainly well used as critique. Do you have anything? Did you want to make any comment on this scene, Ed?
It's so powerful. Hamlet is also killed by a trick in the play, a poisoning of his sword. My main comment is I can't wait to watch this film later tonight
It's a
and
wonderful
see
film.
the alternate take, because it's an alternate take on Hamlet. It's very interesting.
Yes.
In Hamlet, Ophelia, of course, commits suicide
Yeah.
a little earlier on.
Nishi does not. He's really trying to expose the corporation, and he gets killed
Right.
by corporate head. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about is Lear, a version of Shakespeare's King Lear, which is also a free adaptation, and that is Albert Maltz's novel, The Journey of Simon McKeever. I called my review of the book Lear on the Highway. Albert Maltz was a blacklisted writer, one of what was called the Hollywood 10, and there's Maltz, actually. Um, he's the inset in that thing. 8 writers, 1 producer, 1 director, ordered in 1947 to appear in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He was a major writer who subsequently could not get work, and so in 1948 he wrote this novel about aging, which was not published in the US, but recently republished by a British publisher. Simon in the book is an old man, 72, gray in the teeth, who can no longer work because of, as he says, his arthritis. Just as Lear makes a monumental mistake, which causes him in old age to be homeless by dividing his kingdom among the 2 daughters, Regan and Goneril, who end up being ruthless to him, as he misreads the actual love of his younger daughter, Cordelia. So too Simon, who worked on oil rigs and can no longer get into the field, but he wants to be back, meets a woman in a drugstore who tells him there's a cure for arthritis. A doctor in Glendale. He's in an old age home in San Francisco, and so he, like Lear, takes to the road, having to go 400 miles to the south to find the doctor. And at one point, like Lear's mad scene on the moor, has a nightmare dream, but like Lear, who eventually recognizes Cordelia for who she is, and thus perseveres, in something of his old age, Simon's wife, who died during the Depression, comes to him and assures him he will be all right. But whereas for Lear it's too late and he enters in the final scene bearing Cordelia's corpse, Simon does discover a purpose. Like Lear, he reconciles himself with old age, finally realizing when the doctor in Glendale, after this whole long journey, tells him there is no cure, he resolves instead to return to the nursing home and work on a book of quotes as an aid to the working man, where he will put down in quotes everything he has learned so it will not be forgotten. I should say the novel was presented to Walter Houston, John Huston's father, but Fox would not touch it because it was written by a blacklistee. Later, it was presented to Spencer Tracy, also interested in doing the role, and finally to Henry Fonda, who had never gotten an Oscar and thought this might be the ticket and signed on, but the film still was never made. In the end, Maltz's Lear remains only a novel and did not make the widescreen, but it was another interesting adaptation of Shakespeare, and whereas Kurosawa's ends down in critique, Maltz's Simon McKeever ends on a positive note. Do you want to say something about Lear and Ed?
Sounds like a really interesting adaptation. The positive note that Lear ends on is supernatural. I mean, he does feel like there's some supernatural reconciliation between him and Cordelia.
Mm.
Um,
Yep.
Yeah.
And in a way, he kind of accepts his age, He
Yes.
accepts
Yes.
his madness. He accepts that madness is part of his age, instead of railing against it and trying to reclaim his power, which is what he's been trying to do a lot of the time. It just as Simon also accepts his age, that he's not going to be able, at 72 with arthritis, he's not going to get back into the oil fields and be a pipe fitter again, and figures out what he can do to help further humanity, which is quite interesting, actually. Well, that's the end of our journey through Shakespearean noir. Thank you all for joining me, and thanks so much, Ed, for coming along.
Really my pleasure. It's really great insights into Shakespeare. Thank you, Dennis.
Yes, and thank you.